On the morning of the 31st of August 1997, people in the United Kingdom were waking up to some tragic news. Diana, the former wife of the then Prince Charles, had died after being in a car accident in a tunnel in Paris. The news hit a previously untapped vein of public grief, with mourners from all walks of life congregating to lay flowers or just be in the presence of others who were also feeling the loss of the woman known as the People's Princess. Over 1 million people lined the streets for her funeral, while a global audience of over 2.5 billion watched it on TV. As the details of the accident came under scrutiny, though, questions arose as to what exactly had happened and who was to blame, with some even pointing the finger at the royal family themselves. The circumstances around the crash and the rumours that came after were all due to what was happening in Diana's life at the time. In 1981, Lady Diana Spencer had married Charles, then the Prince of Wales, becoming the Princess of Wales. The couple had 2 sons, William and Henry, known as Harry. Because of her good looks and style, sociable personality, her charity work, and the bond she shared with her children, Diana became a global icon and was frequently called the most photographed woman in the world. Charles and Diana eventually separated in 1992, with their divorce being finalised in 1996. But due to her high profile, popularity, and the fact that she was the mother to the heir to the throne, she was still known as Diana, Princess of Wales, or simply Princess Diana. In the summer of 1997, Diana and her sons took a trip to Saint-Tropez on the French Riviera, where they also spent time on a yacht with billionaire Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed and his family, which included his son, Dodi. Princess Diana was now post-divorce and starting her new life outside the confines of the palace. She looked to be relaxed and was having fun, spending time with her boys in the sunshine, as documented by the large number of images captured by celebrity photographers, also known as the paparazzi, who were hanging around in boats near the private yacht. Diana even approached them at one point to say that they were freaking her children out, but this did little to tone down their attention. Many photographers claimed that Diana wasn't opposed to the publicity the photos gave her, and they were always extremely popular with the press and public, so they thought following her around was basically fair game. Diana herself even acknowledged her bond with the public via the use of images, saying in one of her last interviews, "Being permanently in the public eye gives me a special responsibility, notably that of using the impact of photographs to get a message across, a message about an important cause or certain values. If I had to define my role, I would say that I was a messenger." Diana then started a relationship with Dodi Fayed, which sent the photographers into overdrive, with helicopters flying over Fayed's yacht and villa they had in Saint-Tropez to try and get pictures of the new couple, despite this actually being against French privacy laws. One of Fayed's French lawyers, Bernard Dartevel, sent formal warnings to magazines and filed a complaint with the police about what Dodi Fayed thought was the press's increasingly aggressive behaviour. Then, on the 30th of August 1997, Dodi and Diana were on a yacht off the coast of Sardinia and had been bothered by photographers coming up to them in a speedboat. They flew to Paris later that afternoon, where more photographers met their private jet, and the couple were followed into the city by paparazzi on motorbikes. The driver that took them to Dodi's Paris apartment from the airport was Henri Paul, the assistant chief of security at the Ritz, a Parisian hotel owned by Mohammed Al Fayed. More paparazzi waited outside the apartment for the couple to emerge. The Fayed's lawyer, Bernard Dartevel, said in a piece for the New York Times by Roger Cohen that "It's remarkable that in Paris they were photographed all day. From pictures confiscated by the police, you can see that they were followed constantly. The security guards had to intervene, that Diana was trying to avoid the camera, and that Dodi was annoyed." The pair tried to do some shopping on the Champs-Élysées, but were constantly followed by photographers. They eventually made it to the Ritz Hotel, where they stayed for about an hour until 7:30 p.m. Driver and chaperone Henri Paul had been told his shift was over for the day at about 7 p.m, so he had already left. Dodi and Diana had scheduled to go somewhere else for dinner. However, such was the amount of press around them that they scrapped the idea, going back to Dodi's apartment before ending up back at the Ritz. Henri Paul was called back to drive the couple away, as there was still a large number of photographers at the front of the hotel, and as a long-term Ritz employee with a background in the French army, he was seen as a safe pair of hands. Then, at 12:20 a.m. on Sunday the 31st of August 1997, Henri Paul and Dodi security guard Trevor Rees-Jones got into the front of a black Mercedes S280 sedan, and Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana got into the back. A few minutes later, 2 people would be dead and Diana would be fighting for her life. Even though the party left from the back of the Ritz Hotel, photographers in cars and on motorbikes soon spotted them. In a bid to lose the paparazzi, Paul is alleged to have jumped in a red light and sped into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at more than twice the posted speed limit. While inside the tunnel, Paul lost control of the car, hitting a white Fiat Uno, and the Mercedes then swerved across 2 lanes, crashing headfirst into the corner of a concrete pillar before spinning and hitting the tunnel wall backwards. The impact with the pillar was so severe that the engine was pushed into the front seat. When help arrived a few minutes later, Henri Paul and Dodi Fayed were declared dead at the scene. Trevor Rees-Jones was conscious but badly injured, and Princess Diana was awake but fading fast. First responders managed to remove her from the crumpled remains of the car, and she was taken by ambulance to a hospital, arriving at around 2 a.m. Due to the internal injuries that she'd sustained, Diana went into cardiac arrest, and after unsuccessful attempts to resuscitate her, she was declared dead at 4 a.m. She was 36 years old. Because the paparazzi had been following the car as it left the Ritz, there were plenty of photographers on hand when the Mercedes crashed. Several photographers actually took pictures of Diana as she lay in the car, which were largely suppressed from public view, and the few that were published met with extremely negative feedback for their distastefulness. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, several things were discovered that shed light on how this had happened. Nobody in the car had been wearing a seatbelt. It was originally claimed that Trevor Rees-Jones had been wearing one, however this was later disproved, and in paparazzi shots taken of the car during its last fateful journey, you can see that he isn't wearing one, at least at the start of the ride. Rees-Jones was in a coma for 10 days and, along with other injuries, broke every bone in his face. He has no memory of the crash at all. It was also reported that driver Henri Paul had been way over the limit for alcohol, meaning that he hadn't been in a fit state to drive in the first place. The fact that they'd been followed by the press all day led to many people saying things like Diana had been hounded to death by the paparazzi, as if they hadn't been following her, the crash would never have happened. There were also witnesses who said a photographer on a motorbike had been in front of the Mercedes taking pictures, and the bright flash had impaired Paul's vision, which is what caused the crash. If there was a motorbike in the tunnel, the rider has never come forward, probably for understandable, if cowardly, reasons. This isn't the only conspiracy theory tied to the crash, though, of course, and Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, made a lot of noise in the media, stating that far from this being a tragic accident, Diana and his son had actually been murdered by the royal family. Mohammed Al-Fayed was extremely vocal about his beliefs following the deaths of Dodi and Diana. He repeatedly stated that the Queen's husband, Prince Philip, had ordered security services such as MI6 to basically put a hit out on Diana and his son. If you're wondering why, it's because, according to Al-Fayed, Diana was pregnant with Dodi's child and they were about to become engaged. This would introduce the scandal of Muslim blood into the royal family, so the monarchy would stop at nothing to prevent this from happening. If this sounds a bit far-fetched, it's because, well, it is. While we don't exactly know how Dodi and Diana felt about each other, they'd only been in a relationship for a few weeks. Dodi did buy a ring to give to Diana at the Ritz, but we'll never know what it actually meant. There's anecdotal evidence from friends that Diana was not interested in anything too serious, telling her friend Lady Annabel Goldsmith 2 days before she died that, quote, "I need marriage like a rash on my face." Diana had been in a relationship with Pakistan-born heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, which ended shortly before she started seeing Dodi Fayed. This relationship had been kept under wraps, with Diana wearing disguises to visit Khan, and Khan being smuggled in the boot of a car to meetings with Diana. While she was smitten with him, her level of fame ultimately drove them apart, as Khan couldn't deal with the intense public attention. He has kept quiet in the years since they broke up, but some of Diana's friends speculate that she only began a relationship with Dodi to make him jealous. The very fact of Khan's existence also throws a spanner in the works of the Al-Fayed conspiracy theory. Khan was raised Muslim, yet the royal family don't appear to have wanted him dead, and he dated Diana for much longer than Dodi Fayed did. A potential Muslim stepfather to a future king isn't really that troubling in this day and age, especially as he would have been on Diana's side, not the hereditary monarchy side. Basically, there is no evidence to support the claim that Diana and her boyfriend were murdered because the UK monarchy didn't want a Muslim as part of their extended family. Diana wasn't tested specifically for pregnancy, as there were much more pressing issues on hand, but no indications of raised HCG levels were found in her blood, and when you look at the timeline, the relationship had only been going on for a few weeks, so even if she was pregnant, it would have been so early on that Diana herself probably wouldn't have been aware of it, much less her boyfriend's father. Also, Al-Fayed didn't start making these claims until a long time after the crash, probably using it to bring the case back into the spotlight. Questions were also raised about the length of time it had taken to get Diana to hospital. She'd been removed from the wreckage at about 1 a.m, but it took over an hour to make the 6-kilometre or 3.7-mile journey. This has been explained by the fact that Diana went into cardiac arrest and had been resuscitated at the scene, so the ambulance didn't even leave until 1:41 a.m. It then drove slowly in order to keep Diana as stable as possible. The force of the crash had torn some of her pulmonary veins, shunting her heart into the right side of her chest. When they reached the hospital, doctors tried to save her life for 2 hours before pronouncing her dead. There were also rumours that the driver, Henri Paul, had been working as an assassin for some secret organisation or the other, although there was no consensus over who he might be working for, and perhaps the bigger question, why he was working for them. We've already established that there wasn't any motivation to remove Diana from the picture. She'd already been through possibly the world's most public divorce at the time, and was trying to move on with her life. She had 2 sons with Charles, ensuring the line of succession, and just seemed to want to be able to get on with things on her own. If for some reason Henri Paul were tasked with the murder of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed, crashing their car is hardly the most foolproof way to do it. As a spin-off of this idea, there was also the hypothesis that the Fiat driver and an unknown motorcyclist were working together to ambush the car and its occupants in the tunnel. Transfer paint on the Mercedes confirmed that it had made contact with a white Fiat Uno, and witnesses in the tunnel stated that they'd seen a bright light before the crash, and a motorbike had then fled the scene. MI6 was implicated again, as a source from the British Army Special Forces claimed that this was a planned attack by the agency using a strobe light to blind the driver and cause a crash. The white Fiat was never definitively traced, but it is widely believed to have belonged to 22-year-old taxi driver Lee Fontaine. Later on the night of the crash, he resprayed his car red and replaced the bumpers. He also gave a weak alibi as to where he'd been at the time and refused to cooperate any further with investigators. Another suspicious fact was that there was no CCTV footage of the crash, despite there being cameras around. However, instead of this being a cover-up, investigators found that the camera by the tunnel entrance was owned by a company that didn't hire staff overnight, so it just wasn't on or monitored after 11 p.m. Other cameras along the route that the Mercedes took could not provide any clear footage either, as they were mainly security cameras pointed at the entrances to specific buildings. In 1997, Paris didn't have the amount of CCTV cameras that London did, so it was unfortunate, but not suspicious, that there was no useful footage of the Mercedes on its final route. French authorities carried out a thorough investigation, which was followed by an additional report from a French judge. Both concluded that Henri Paul was to blame for the crash, as he was over the drink-drive limit and also had traces of antidepressant medication in his system, which, when mixed with alcohol, might have impaired his judgment even more. While several photographers had been arrested at the scene for failing to help, no charges were brought against them. Their cameras were seized, but no photographs were found showing them near the Mercedes in the tunnel immediately prior to the crash. In the end, by September 1999, the French investigations had wrapped up, leaving Paul as the sole party responsible for the crash. Mohammed Al-Fayed's claims continued to escalate, though, as he laid the blame not only at the royal family's door, but also started throwing ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair's name into the mix, as well as Diana's sister, and even the CIA. Eventually, a request was made from the British Royal Coroner to the Metropolitan Police, and in 2004, they launched Operation Paget, which, among other things, granted them unheard-of access to MI6, letting investigators delve into this strange world of conspiracies to see if there was any truth to the rumours. 14 officers were tasked with working on Operation Paget, which ended up taking 3 years, ran to nearly 900 pages, and cost £12.5 million. The team looked into all aspects of the conspiracy theories that had been put forward in public, including any possible murder motives. Diana's alleged pregnancy, the time it took for the lad to reach the hospital, the possible involvement of MI6, the CIA, or any other intelligence service, and if Henri Paul had been some sort of secret agent. They also investigated the paparazzi's role in the crash. One paparazzo in particular, James Anderson, had been publicly named by Al-Fayed, as he drove a white Fiat Uno and was found dead in mysterious circumstances about 2.5 years after the crash. In the course of their investigation, however, Operation Paget confirmed that Anderson had not been in Paris on the night of the crash, having been elsewhere covering a different story. His Fiat Uno was also not in roadworthy condition at the time. His body had been found in his burned out BMW with a hole in the skull, which Al-Fayed contested meant he was either murdered to tie up loose ends or had killed himself because of a guilty conscience over his involvement with the death of Diana and Dodi Fayed. Pathologists confirmed that the hole in the Benson's skull had come from within because of the extreme levels of heat in the car, not from a bullet or blow to the head. No evidence of foul play was found, and his death was ruled a suicide. Several friends of Anderson confirmed that he had mentioned how he would kill himself if anything ever happened within his life or marriage. He would prepare his car for an explosion, sit in it, and light a cigar. While we can't be sure what drove him to end his life in May 2000, it wasn't due to the guilt over what happened in the Pont d'Arme tunnel, as he hadn't actually been there. The French inquiry, on the other hand, hadn't ended up charging any of the photographers, and Operation Paget came to the same conclusions. While it can't be denied that the Mercedes was being driven recklessly because of the attention Diana and Dodi had been getting all day, in the end, the paparazzi were deemed to have been behaving in a normal way and no criminal acts had occurred. While it's not great that some of the first on the scene were taking photographs of dead and dying people, they had not obstructed or interfered with the scene, and at least one of the photographers had attempted to call emergency services. One French photographer claimed that Paul had sped away from the pack at a traffic light and the paparazzi hadn't immediately followed, meaning that they were at least a minute behind when the crash happened and therefore had no direct blame in the accident. While they definitely minimised any actions they had taken that night, no investigations ever found that any members of the press pack had directly caused or been responsible for the crash. As regards to the possible motorcyclist in the tunnel and the flash of light, this could have been a camera going off, or, as the ex-Special Forces agent later alleged, a strobe light in a targeted attack. When Operation Paget looked into this, they found additional witnesses to the crash, as well as others that had been interviewed at the time, who never mentioned any flash of light. If a strobe had been used, the effect it would have had would have been more obvious to far more people in the tunnel, but this kind of thing was never mentioned by anyone. In the end, it was determined that there hadn't been a flash of light. As for a motorbike driving close to the Mercedes, some witnesses say that they did see one in the tunnel, but others didn't, and whether it was involved in the crash or not is undetermined, and the rider has never been identified. As to whether Henri Paul was in the pay of a secret security agency or not, Operation Paget found no links between him and MI6, although he may have been working in some capacity for the French secret services. More to the point for this story though, he'd clocked off work hours before the crash and was only called back because another driver was too nervous of all the paparazzi attention. Paul hadn't been scheduled to drive that night, so how could any assassination plot involving him have been planned for that time? In short, Operation Paget came to the same conclusion as the French had come to in 1999, that Henri Paul was to blame because he'd drunk alcohol and was using medication prior to getting behind the wheel. While there had been some questions over the tests performed on Paul, several were done to ascertain his blood alcohol level, including testing vitreous fluid from his eye, which is seen as a reliable toxicology indicator. Paul had thought he'd finished work for the night at around 7 p.m. and had been witnessed drinking 2 glasses of Ricard, an anise-flavoured French spirit, at the Ritz bar after he got back there at around 10 p.m. We don't know what he was doing between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m, and the toxicology results showed that he may have been drinking as the equivalent of about 5 glasses of Ricard, or more than a bottle of wine, were found in his blood. Traces of antidepressants and a tranquilizer were also found in his system, culminating in investigators concluding that he was impaired and therefore to blame for the car crashing in the tunnel at high speed. Operation Paget's official findings were that the crash happened because of grossly negligent driving. There was no substance to any of the conspiracy rumours, and Henri Paul's alcohol and drug consumption, as well as the excessive speed the car was travelling, and the fact that nobody inside was wearing a seatbelt, contributed to the deaths of the 3 occupants. John Stevens, who headed up the inquiry, called it a tragic accident, adding, "A crash of this nature is similar to a major crash of an airliner. There is a long chain of events, take out any link of that chain, and this wouldn't have happened." For his part, Mohammed Al-Fayed called the findings garbage. Operation Paget was concluded in 2006, but a separate coroner's inquest was started in 2007, ending with a jury verdict in 2008. As there was no evidence of a conspiracy to murder Princess Diana, that wasn't one of the options available to the jury, but they could choose between an unlawful killing, accidental death, or an open verdict. And after a 6-month hearing, the majority of the jury decided that gross negligence of both the paparazzi and Henri Paul were to blame for the unlawful killing of Princess Diana. As the crashes happened in France, however, this inquest didn't have any further jurisdiction over the photographers. They'd previously been cleared by French authorities and Operation Paget, and no further action was taken against them. It's understandable that a father would want justice for his son. However, Mohammed Al-Fayed's bizarre claims speak more about him than about wanting to find the truth. Al-Fayed had a love-hate relationship with the royal family, as he was desperate to ingratiate himself with them, yet publicly implicated them in his son's death. He was famously denied British citizenship twice, once before and once after the accident. Henri Paul was repeatedly labelled as the cause of the crash, and as a long-term employee of the Ritz that was owned by Al-Fayed, maybe he was trying to shift the blame onto anyone but his own staff. The Queen was also criticised due to the lack of public acknowledgement she gave after the news of Diana's death. No official announcement was made for 5 days, during which time the public was uniting in grief in a way that definitely wasn't the norm for stereotypical stiff upper lip Brits. While it was later explained that the royals were grieving in private and trying to protect young Princes William and Harry, their silence came across as tone deaf at the time. Despite this, the memory and legacy of Princess Diana has lived on through her sons and their affinity for charity work and compassion for marginalised groups. Diana is buried on a small island on a lake in the grounds of her family's estate. Prince Charles married his long-term love, Camilla Parker Bowles, in 2005. However, due to a potential public backlash, she didn't use the Princess of Wales title, choosing instead the Duchess of Cornwall. While questions will always linger for some about the exact set of circumstances surrounding the crash, the investigations around it have been deep and thorough and all point to a tragic accident. The untimely deaths of Diana and Dodi served as a cautionary tale for those chasing celebrity stories. However, in a culture still obsessed with the rich and famous, who knows how many more victims there may be.